question of if I'm exporting, what do I do is a good one, because we've had nasty examples of people who come to see us with a really successful business, but they've got themselves into all kinds of trouble because they started off with just a few $1,000s of sales to the US, and within a few months it's a few $100,000s of sales, and they're so busy and so excited and so passionate about their business that they forget all about things like tax, which is pretty boring, and as a result they find they've got unpaid tax in the US, and it's really quite tragic when that happens. So really would encourage people to make sure that they do work out exactly what kind of presence they've got in a place like the United States, because the rules in some of these foreign countries can be very tough if you don't meet your obligations, and you can end up with a structure that's completely inappropriate to your circumstances. If you decide that you want to export to somewhere like the United States, the key tax point I think it needs to be made is that generally paying tax in foreign countries is not as good as paying tax in New Zealand. And the basic reason for that is that if you're operating through a company, first of all, if you pay foreign tax, you don't get the benefit of the imputation credits, and by that I mean in New Zealand, if you pay tax within the company, you get a credit for that tax against the dividends that finally come out to you in your own name or in your trust name or whoever the shareholder is. So that means that deliberately the tax system is structured to encourage you to pay tax in New Zealand. So that's the first point. If you can not have a tax presence in these overseas countries, that's good. Now, sometimes that won't be possible, but oftentimes we find people wanting to export to the United States, for some reason they go there on a trip, they get all excited and they set up a US corporation when they really didn't need to, because if they're just selling from New Zealand, they don't have any staff on the ground in the United States, then they don't need to have a tax presence there. They might be much better to appoint a distributor or an agent, thereby generating their commercial income for them there, but without having a tax presence. And companies need to realise, and individuals need to realise, that having a tax presence in somewhere like the United States, or the UK or Australia, where you have to start filing tax returns, etc., it adds a whole new layer of cost and complexity. So that's my first general point of advice. Try and do things directly from New Zealand to the extent commercially reasonable. The question of physical products versus services versus online, the tax rules are basically the same. As a New Zealand resident, company or individual, you pay tax on your worldwide income, whether it be a product or a service. One area that does get quite messy is computer software, because that's an area where sometimes people will enter into license agreements with people offshore, and under tax rules all around the world, license fees are often considered to be royalties, and that gives rise sometimes to a withholding tax in, for example, the US. So if you're selling software to the US and there's a license fee payable back to New Zealand, there may be US what's called non-resident withholding tax at 10, sometimes 15%, sometimes 5%, but just get advice before you enter into those agreements. Maybe there's another way of selling your software without actually getting into that foreign tax net. Now, hopefully the foreign tax will be able to be offset against New Zealand tax liability, but sometimes you might have losses in New Zealand, and if you've got foreign tax you get no credit because you're not paying any tax here. So like everything, get your ducks in a row before you go off to duck shooting season. My general advice to exporters is understand your market before you go there. Many people, for example, felt that China would be an easy bet, and of course it's not. So you really do have to understand what you're getting yourself into before you actually start exporting. Often a local agent will be very valuable there. And the second point is to get your structure worked out in your own mind before you actually start doing anything of substance. And the third thing is not to take your eye off the ball. I think we've had experience of many New Zealanders that have been successful with their exports, but it gets away on them because they take their eye off the foreign market, turn their eye to the next market, and without having necessarily put the staff in place, the infrastructure in place to support what's often a very good business.